Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So today we are going to talk about the life cycle hooks in the mounting phase. So we have two kind of phases in life cycle hooks for LWC. One is mounting, the other one is unmounting phase. So in the mounting phase, our component gets loaded and rendered. In the unmounting phase, the component is unloaded basically or deleted. Okay. So today's agenda is life cycle hooks. We have different type of life cycle hooks. When I talk about today's agenda, it is all about mounting phase. We will cover unmounting phase in a separate video. So there are three types of mounting phase life cycle hooks: constructor, connected callback, and rendered callback. And at the end, we will see how this callback flows are called one after the another. What is the flow of this particular hooks? So let us understand what is lifecycle hooks. So lifecycle hooks are nothing but callback methods which are triggered at some point of time in different phases of the component. So whenever some particular phase occurs on our LWC component, a particular lifecycle hook gets called. So we will see among these three different life cycle hooks, when do they get called and what are their uses, what are the points which we should keep in mind when we are trying to use our life cycle hooks, and what to be done and not to be done. Okay, so the first one is constructor. Constructor is basically called when the component instance is created. It is the first method which gets called when we are invoking any LWC component on our page. So in order to use the constructor, there is a requirement that we need to call a super method first inside the constructor. So we can use the elements from the component using this dot template, but the component properties we won't be able to access at this particular phase. So we can define a constructor method. This is a lifecycle hook, so we can access it using the constructor method, and we can call super and everything else. Now there are few points to note when we talk about constructor. This particular lifecycle hooks is called from parent to child. So the parent constructor gets called first and the child constructor is called after that. You cannot access the child component in our parent component using the constructor method because the template body is not still loaded, and there should not be any attributes which should be accessed using the constructor. So this particular lifecycle hook is not very frequently used in real time scenarios. The other two callbacks are which are more used in our life cycle, like regular LWC usage. So the next life cycle hook which we have is connected callback. This is one of the most important life cycle hooks in the entire LWC phase. So we need to understand it very well what this callback is doing. So the connected callback, when we define it, it gets called when the component is inserted into the DOM. So our component gets inserted and after that the connected callback is called, which basically means that our we can use few of the attributes over there because they're already present. Now, what is this particular callback or lifecycle hook is used for? This lifecycle hook is used to fetch data, like if we want some data to be present at the time of our component load, we can do that. If say we need any external JavaScript or CSS libraries, we can do that. If we want any custom settings or custom metadata, those to be accessed, we can do that, those things or if we want to initialize some things, we can do those particular activities in the connected callback. Okay. So again, this particular lifecycle hook, this flows from the parent to child. You cannot access the child component still in the connected callback, and ideally it should not be used to load any values, like setting up values data for your attributes that you can do in your getter and setters method. So this is particularly used to fetch data, setting up things, initializing things, and all those things over there. Now, our third callback method is rendered callback. This is also one of the most important callbacks in entire LWC, but this callback comes with a caution. We should be using it like with bit carefully, because this particular callback can cause infinite loop. So this should be used with a bit of caution. Now, what is rendered callback? When does it get called? So every time there is a change in our component, like if anytime a component is getting updated and it needs to be re-rendered, so at that time the rendered callback gets called. Now the component can get updated multiple times. So this is the only lifecycle hook which can be fired multiple times during the entire lifecycle of a component. Constructor and connected callback only gets called once when when the component is loaded. But rendered callback can be called multiple times. That is why I was saying that this callback should be used with a big bit of caution, because it every time a change is made, it will be called again and again. So if you are making any changes in the rendered callback method which leads to uh, change, it will call again and again, and it will return into an infinite loop that will cause the entire page to break. So another thing which we need to keep in mind is, this is the only lifecycle hook which flows from child to parent, which means that the child rendered callback will be called first and the parent rendered callback will be called at a later stage. Now, life cycle of hooks. So this we will see once we have gone through our examples for constructor, connected callback, and rendered callback. Okay, so how does the life cycle of hooks work? Which method gets called first and which method gets called after that? Okay, now I have a component created already, so let us see the constructor method. So as we discussed, we need to call super first, and after that I will say parent constructor called. Similarly, I'll create two different methods for rendered and connected callback. And I'll create another one for rendered callback. So what we expect is the constructor gets called first, after that the connected callback, and then the rendered callback. Now let me create some parent LWC hooks component. Okay. Now let us see it in Chrome, the working. I have already added the component to the page. So we can see parent LWC component is printed. And in the console, let me enlarge it. In the console we can see that parent constructor called, after that parent connected callback called, and after that parent rendered callback called. So this is how the entire LWC hooks work for the single component. Now, before going ahead, let me talk about parent and child component. So, parent and child component is basically when we, what is parent and child component? Let's say that we have two different components, component A and component B. I want component B to be used within component A. Okay, so component A gets as a parent component and component B acts as a child component. So basically, when in real world scenarios, when we develop a big huge pages, we do not develop everything inside one big component. We break it into multiple several components. So the benefit is we can debug that easily. Second, the component can be reused. Let's say that there is a data table and we want it to be used multiple places, so we can create one component and use it at different places. We do not need to write the same code every time. Okay, so I'll call the child component. My child component name is LWC hooks child. So right now we do not need to worry about this particular line. How does it work and what is child and parent? It was just for a better understanding. We will cover another videos wherein we will talk about parent and child and how do they communicate with each other. Okay. So I'm just putting one child component, and now I'll call all the three methods in the child component as well, and then we will see that what is the order at which they get printed. So this will help us understand more about how the order works for the lifecycle hooks. Okay, now let us refresh this page. Okay, we need to deploy parent as well. Parent we did not deploy. Yeah, so we have parent LWC hooks component, and see we have included our child component into the parent component. So if you see at the page level, I have only added the parent component and no child component was added over here. So I have only added one component, which is LWC hooks parent. But since we used our child component inside this LWC hooks parent, we can access the entire child component. Now let us see what is the order which it gets printed. So the parent constructor is called, then the parent connected callback is called. After that, if you see, child constructor is called and not the parent rendered callback. So child constructor is called, after that the child connected callback is called. So if you see for constructor, first the parent constructor is called, after that the child constructor is called. Similarly, for connected callback, parent connected callback gets called first, and after that the child connected callback is getting called. But for rendered callback, this is not the situation. In rendered callback, the child rendered callback is called first and the parent rendered callback is called later. So that's what we talked about here, that for constructor the method flows from parent to child. For connected callback, it flows from parent to child again. But for rendered callback, it flows from child to parent. So now let us see what is the life cycle of a hook. So as a component is loaded, the constructor called on the parent. So the first thing which gets called is the constructor method. After that, we see that public properties are updated. If there are any to be updated, then they are updated. Then the parent component is inserted into the DOM. Now once the parent component is inserted into the DOM, the connected callback gets called and the parent is rendered. Okay. Now after that, the same thing happens for the child as well. The constructors get called on the child. It updates the public properties for the child. Then the child is inserted into the DOM. Then the connected callback is called for the child component and the child component is rendered. So till this child rendered, we have everything is similar to the parent. Now the differentiation starts once the child is rendered and there are no other child for this particular child component like parent, child, and there are no child for this component, then the rendered component for this particular rendered callback for this particular component is called. Once the rendered component of the child gets called, the rendered component of the parent gets called, and that is the how the component is loaded. So that we can see here as well. The parent constructor gets called, then the parent connected callback gets called, and then the parent component is rendered. As we talk about here, constructor, then the connected callback, then the parent is rendered. Then the child constructor is called, child connected callback is called, child constructor, public property setting, child connected callback, and the child is rendered. After that, the child rendered callback is called, the child rendered callback is called, and then the parent rendered callback is called. So this is how the lifecycle hooks work into the LWC component. So this was very basic about what we can do inside the hooks, but the entire life cycle of these three methods or these three life cycle hooks, they are working. Out of these three, the most important callback or lifecycle hooks which we will use in our everyday LWC development will be connected callback and rendered callback. Constructor is something which is very rarely used in the everyday development. So connected callback and rendered callback are used at a very big scale. You will see in most of the components on your org to have the connected callback and rendered callback present. So that was it about today's session. Thank you. Stay tuned for more videos.